Donald Trump, President of the United States, Israel Katz, Israel's Defense Minister, Iranian Armed Forces, Tehran, capital of Iran, Press TV, Iranian state media, Fars news agency, Iranian semi-official news agency, Reuters, Axios, US Central Command, CENTCOM, Popular Mobilization Forces, PMF al-Hashd al-Shabi, Iraq, including Western Anbar province, United Arab Emirates, UAE, OPEC, Venezuela, anti-Iran separatist group, unnamed, linked to the targeted camp in Iraq, mobilization, hostile drones, reconnaissance, UAVs, micro-drones, US bases in Iraq, senior PMF commander, unnamed, top Iranian security source, unnamed, Todd, interviewer referenced, in quote, Mohammed, individual referenced, in quote, naval blockade of Iran script. Fresh flare-ups in the Middle East have moved beyond headline friction into a dangerous new phase tonight as air raids and counter-strikes, accusations and alarms all weave a accusations and alarms all weave a slow-moving narrative of escalation. In the last 24 hours, Iranian forces reported strikes on a camp in Iraq tied to anti-Iran separatist elements. In Baghdad's corridors and on the battle-scarred roads of Western Anbar province, the aftermath of deadly air attacks has compounded an already volatile atmosphere. At least 15 fighters within the Popular Mobilization Forces were reported killed, including the senior commander, and the PMF has publicly blamed the United States for the strike, saying that command headquarters was hit while personnel were on duty. Those allegations add a combustible ingredient to a conflict that has already spilled well beyond its initial front lines. Elements of the Popular Mobilization Forces are formally integrated into Iraq's security architecture, even as factions within the umbrella remain closely aligned with Tehran. That dual identity, part state, part militia, makes any attack that inflicts heavy PMF casualties both a domestic Iraqi political crisis and regional provocation with immediate geopolitical consequences. Inside Iran, alarms spread in a matter of minutes. Air defenses were suddenly activated over the capital, with anti-aircraft fire reported across multiple districts. State and semi-official outlets described what they called micro-drones and reconnaissance UAVs over western and southwestern Tehran. Officials said the activity later moved towards central districts. Some channels emphasized there were no ground explosions, framing the confrontation as strictly aerial, a layer of complexity that raises questions about intent and control. For now, no independent verification has confirmed who launched the reported drones, where they came from, or whether any were actually intercepted. Still, the triggering of Tehran's air defenses alone is a significant signal. A capital city moving from normal life to military readiness is a warning shot felt across the region. Iran's state outlets, Press TV, Fars and Tasnim among them of. Third rapid updates. One semi-official dispatch described the response as focused on small aerial targets. Another later said the firing had ceased and calm had returned. Such sequences are familiar in the fog of kinetic confrontation, where first reports, corrections, and evolving claims cascade through rival media ecosystems. But whether the flashes overhead were hostile micro-drones, surveillance aircraft, or false alarms, the consequence is the same. Heightened perceptions of vulnerability inside Iran and an unmistakable psychological effect on publics and decision-makers alike. On the other side of the equation, Israeli officials have openly signaled they may resume operations targeting Iranian interests. Israel's defense minister warned publicly that the campaign against Iranian capacity might not be finished, and that his country stands prepared to act again if required. Those comments, voiced in the context of broader military planning, mark Israel as a direct stakeholder in any widening confrontation, a point that increases the risk of miscalculation in an already compressed strategic environment. Washington's posture is also central to what happens next. The US President, Donald J. Trump has framed the approach in starkly muscular terms and in the language of pressure and force. In public remarks, he defended a naval blockade in the posture of American power. The blockade is genius. Okay, the blockade has been 100% foolproof. It shows how good our Navy is. He went further, invoking the strength of US forces and the need for immediate concessions from Tehran. Nobody's going to play games. We have the greatest military in the world. Iran, the same thing. The militarily, we've wiped them out. They have no military left. They have to cry, uncle. That's all they have to do. Just say we give up. We give up. Such rhetoric matters. Words from the Oval Office reverberate across alliance networks, embolden hardliners, and shape the calculation. Serve commanders on the ground. At the same time, US says Central Command has reportedly prepared plans for short, sharp strikes on Iranian infrastructure meant to compel Tehran back to the negotiating table. A strategy that, if executed, aims for rapid attrition of specific capabilities rather than an all-out invasion. But any plan that targets infrastructure on Iranian soil risks steep escalation, not simply because of the military impact, but because of the political and symbolic consequences inside Iran. A senior security source, quoted by Iranian media, offered a blunt rejoinder, warning of decisive Iranian response. If pressure continued, Iran will respond with practical and unprecedented action. That statement captures two complementary dynamics at work: a public posture meant to deter further attacks, and a domestic audience that expects retaliation for perceived assaults on sovereignty and forces. The calculus on both sides is shaped by credibility. The credibility of threat and the quest. The credibility of restraint. In Iraq, where the PMF deaths occurred, the narrative is immediate and raw. Iraqi security officials and PMF leaders framed the Anbar strikes as a devastating blow. Families and local leaders demanded answers and accountability. For the United States, the accusation that a US strike killed PMF fighters presents a diplomatic and operational dilemma. If true, it risks inflaming Iraqi public opinion and bolstering those factions who argue that the presence of foreign forces is a provocation. If false, the accusation still functions as a political tool, amplifying tensions between Baghdad and Washington at a moment when Iraqi institutions are already under strain. Across the Gulf, the naval blockade that the United States has maintained on Iran, a centerpiece of the current strategy to coerce Tehran, continues to be both defended and criticized. President Trump's forceful public endorsement of the blockade reflects a deliberate US choice to apply economic and maritime pressure. Economic and maritime pressure in lieu of immediate diplomatic concessions. That policy has supporters who argue that it shrinks Iran's room to maneuver. It has critics who worry it could be a long-term pressure cooker that ultimately provokes a crisis. The detention or interdiction of vessels, the mining of shipping lanes, or even escalatory encounters at sea would all carry consequences that ripple through global markets and regional security. The unfolding events also underscore how the conflict has stretched well beyond the narrow original theaters. Since the start of the broader US-Israel campaign against Iranian capabilities, attacks on USAR campaign against Iranian capabilities, attacks on USAR campaign against Iranian capabilities, positions in Iraq have multiplied, and Iran-aligned militias have repeatedly struck at American bases. Those strikes have, in turn, elicited responses at varying levels of intensity. What began as targeted reprisals is now evolving into a pattern that threatens to lock multiple actors into an extended cycle of tit-for-tat operations, a dynamic for the conflict. That raises the risk of accidental or deliberate spirals. For ordinary citizens in cities like Tehran and Baghdad, the war of headlines has immediate consequences. Schools, markets, and workplaces live under the shadow of alerts. Emergency services and hospital networks must be ready for mass casualties. Supply chains and fuel deliveries risk disruption. Markets respond to uncertainty. Insurance rates spike, commercial operators reroute shipping lanes, and air carriers adjust flight paths. The micro-level impacts, anxious parents, shuttered businesses, commuters delayed by checkpoints, are the human face of strategic confrontation. Diplomatically, there are narrow slivers of space where de-escalation might be negotiated, but they are growing thin. On one hand, there are those who argue that heightened pressure can produce bargaining leverage and yield a negotiated outcome. On the other, there are those who caution that coercive strategies without diplomatic fallbacks risk hardening. G positions and foreclosing compromise, the language from Tehran that restraint has so far been exercised to allow room for diplomacy, but that patience has limits is designed to preserve negotiating space while signaling that restraint is not infinite. In the capitals of the world, allies and regional partners are watching closely. Gulf states, whose economies and politics are entangled in both Washington's posture and Tehran's responses, are balancing a desire for security guarantees against fears of becoming theaters of proxy conflicts. Countries that depend on uninterrupted oil shipments are acutely aware that instability in the Strait of Hormuz or in adjacent maritime routes will have immediate global economic consequences. For energy markets already sensitive to supply shocks, the possibility of renewed disruption is a source of acute concern. Operationally, the presence of small drones and reconnaissance UAVs has introduced a tactical challenge as significant as any missile. Salvo. These smaller platforms are cheaper, harder to attribute, and very effective at creating alarms, forcing defensive responses and shaping public perceptions. When an urban capital like Tehran hears anti-aircraft fire in multiple districts, the political and psychological cost is high, even if the actual damage is limited. The proliferation of such low-cost, high-disruption tools will continue to change the character of crisis management in urban centres. As the situation evolves, three truths stand out. First, the fog of war, where multiple actors issue competing accounts and rapid claims, makes verification difficult and increases the risk of misreporting. Second, the choice architecture facing leaders is compressed. Options range from calibrated, precise military strikes to sweeping blockades, all with different timelines for effect and different risks for escalation. Third, once kinetic operations cross certain thresholds, the death of a high-ranking commander, the target. Ingamated state forces or sustained damage to critical infrastructure. The opportunity for a quick return to the prior status quo narrows rapidly. For journalists, analysts, and publics alike, clarity matters. We must hold to certain facts while acknowledging what remains unverified. Tehran's air defences were activated and anti-aircraft fire was reported. An airstrike in western Anbar province killed multiple PMF fighters, including a senior commander. Province killed multiple PMF fighters. The PMF has accused the United States of responsibility. Iranian state outlets say Tehran's forces struck a camp linked to anti-Iran separatists in Iraq. And Israel's defense minister signaled readiness to renew operations against Iran. President Trump's public statements defending the blockade, including the blockade is genius, the blockade has been 100% foolproof, and his assertion that Iran must cry uncle, are part of the rhetorical backdrop shaping this crisis.
The near-term horizon offers few comfortable certainty.
Sir, if additional strikes follow or if naval interdictions intensify, the conflict could widen. If de-escalatory channels, back-channel diplomacy, third-party mediation or clear red lines communicated between capitals find traction, then the current spikes of violence might be contained. The problem is that both military action and political signalling are now entangled with domestic politics and coalition dynamics across multiple countries, making a neat, rapid solution unlikely. What remains essential is mindful restraint from the actors with the capacity to either inflame or cool the situation. That means disciplined, targeting choices to avoid civilian harm, transparent and verifiable communication where possible to reduce misperception, and a clear political pathway for diplomacy that gives adversaries a face-saving exit if they choose it. Without those elements, the region risks being drawn deeper into a protracted, multi-front confrontation with consequences that would reach F5. Are beyond any single battlefield. Tonight, the message from the capitals is clear. Tensions are high, the risk of further violence is real, and the decisions made in the coming hours and days will shape whether this becomes a contained episode or a broader conflagration. For people on the ground in Tehran, Baghdad, and beyond, that uncertainty is not abstract. It is the sound of anti-aircraft fire in the night, the empty seat at a family table, the long line at a fuel station. For leaders, the moment demands strategic judgment. For the rest of us, it is a reminder of how quickly localized violence can, in the age of drones and instant communications, transform into a regional crisis. We will continue to monitor developments and to bring forward the verified facts as they emerge. But until then, the reality is stark. An already fragile region is on edge, capitals have been placed on military alert, and powerful actors on both sides are signaling that the cost of restraint may soon be tested. But the choice is made now, whether to lean into military pressure, to seek negotiated containment, or to open a door to diplomacy, will determine not just the next headline, but the lives of many who live under the shadow of this escalating.